The dusty streets of Redemption Creek fell silent as the lone figure appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun like a ghost returning from another world. Folks who had been sitting on their porches enjoying the cool evening air froze mid-conversation, eyes narrowed in disbelief. It couldn't be him. Lucas Blackwell had died 3 years ago in the war. They'd buried what remained of him, or so they thought, in a simple pine box when word came back from the battlefield. Yet here was a man wearing his face, walking with the same confident stride, his spurs jingling a familiar tune against the hard-packed dirt of Main Street. Rebecca Rivers stood in the doorway of her father's general store, a crate of supplies balanced against her hip when she spotted him. The crate slipped from her grasp, cans of beans and preserves spilling across the wooden boardwalk. The clatter drew his attention, those unmistakable blue eyes finding hers across the distance. Her breath caught in her throat as he altered his course, heading straight for her with purposeful steps. "Rebecca," he said simply, her name falling from his lips like a prayer. Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1868. The war had been over for 3 years, but its shadows still stretched long across the land. For Rebecca, it had taken everything: her hope, her future, the man she'd promised to marry. Now he stood before her, impossibly alive, his face weathered by sun and hardship, a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw that hadn't been there before. "They said you died at Gettysburg," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Your name is on the memorial in the town square." Lucas removed his hat, revealing hair longer than he'd ever worn it before, streaked with premature silver at the temples. "For a time I wished I had." His voice was deeper, rougher than she remembered. "But I made a promise to come back to you, Rebecca, and here I am." People were gathering now, murmuring in shock and confusion. Old man Hawkins, who'd lost his son in the same battle where Lucas supposedly fell, approached cautiously, his face ashen. "Blackwell, but how?" Lucas turned to face the gathering crowd, his expression unreadable. "I'm not here to explain myself to the town. I came back for one reason." His eyes returned to Rebecca's pale face. For her, Rebecca steadied herself against the doorframe, 1,000 questions swirling in her mind. The man she'd mourned, cried over, finally accepted, was gone, stood before her like a mirage she was afraid to touch. Part of her wanted to run into his arms, but another part, the cautious part that had learned to live without him, held back. You can't just appear after 3 years and expect. She couldn't finish the thought, overwhelmed by emotions too complex to name. "I don't expect anything," Lucas replied quietly, "but I aim to earn back what I lost." Sheriff Miller pushed through the gathering crowd, his hand resting cautiously on his holstered pistol. "This some kind of cruel joke?" "We got documentation from the Union Army that Lucas Blackwell died at Gettysburg." Lucas turned to face the lawman, his stance shifting subtly. Rebecca noticed the way his right hand hovered near his hip, where a revolver rested in a worn leather holster. That was new too. The Lucas she'd known had never carried a gun. "The Union Army buried my name, Sheriff, not me." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken stories. Rebecca found herself stepping forward, drawn by a need to understand, to know what had happened to the young man who had ridden off to war with ideals and promises. "Lucas," she said, her voice stronger now, "my father's gone. The store is mine now. Come inside, we can talk." Relief flickered across his face, though his guard didn't drop entirely. "Thank you, Rebecca." As they stepped into the general store, leaving the murmuring crowd behind, Rebecca felt as though she were stepping into the past and future simultaneously. The door closed behind them with a familiar creak, shutting out the world but leaving them alone with 3 years of ghosts between them. The interior of the store was cool and dim after the bright sunlight outside. Rebecca moved behind the counter, needing the physical barrier between them while she collected her thoughts. Lucas remained by the door, his hat in his hands, turning it slowly as his eyes took in the familiar surroundings. "You've changed things," he observed quietly. "Everything changed," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. "You died, Lucas. I mourned you. We all did." He nodded, accepting her words without argument. I nearly did die. Took a mini ball to the chest at Gettysburg. When I woke up, I was in a field hospital with no identification. Fever took my memories for a time. His fingers traced the scar on his face absently. By the time I remembered who I was, the war was over, and according to official records, Private Lucas Blackwell was dead and buried. That doesn't explain 3 years, Lucas. He set his hat on a nearby barrel and approached the counter slowly, as if giving her time to retreat if she wished. I wasn't the same man who left here, Rebecca. The things I saw, the things I did during the war. He shook his head. I didn't think I deserved to come back to you. Not as the man I'd become. Rebecca's hands clenched into fists on the countertop. So you let me believe you were dead, let me cry over an empty grave, put flowers on it every Sunday for a year. Her voice rose with each question, years of grief transforming into anger. I thought I was doing right by you, he said, his voice low and urgent. Letting you move on instead of bringing back a broken man you wouldn't recognize. That wasn't your decision to make, Rebecca fought back tears that threatened to spill. I had the right to know you were alive, even if you didn't want to come back to me. Lucas looked down at his hands, rougher now, with new calluses that spoke of work different from the farming he'd done before the war. You're right, I was a coward, not about the fighting, but about facing you. About facing this town and everything I left behind. A silence fell between them, filled with the dust motes dancing in the shafts of late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Outside, they could hear the townsfolk still gathered, their voices a low murmur of speculation. What changed? Rebecca finally asked. Why come back now? Lucas met her eyes, and in that moment she saw a glimpse of the young man she had loved, earnest, determined, though now tempered by hardship. I tried to make a new life. Took work as a ranch hand in Colorado, then as a scout for the Army. Rode with a cattle drive to Kansas, but everywhere I went, I carried you with me, your face, your voice. He swallowed hard. A man can only run from himself for so long before he realizes there's nowhere far enough. Rebecca moved from behind the counter then, drawn by something in his voice that resonated with her own loneliness. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see the new lines around his eyes, to smell the leather and trail dust that clung to him. I'm not the same girl you left behind either, Lucas. Father died last winter. I've been running this store alone, making my own decisions, living by my own terms. She lifted her chin slightly. The Rebecca you knew might have simply fallen into your arms, grateful to have her beau returned from the dead, but that's not who I am anymore. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I wouldn't expect anything less. You were always stronger than anyone gave you credit for. He hesitated, then added, I'm not asking for things to be like they were. I don't have that right, but I'm asking for a chance to know the woman you've become. And maybe in time for you to know the man I am now. The store bell jingled as the door opened, breaking the moment between them. Sheriff Miller stepped inside, his expression stern but curious. Rebecca, your presence is causing quite a stir out there, he said, nodding toward Lucas. Folks are wondering if they're seeing a ghost or if there's some kind of explanation. Lucas turned to face the lawman. No ghost, Sheriff. Just a man who's been away too long. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Got any proof you're who you say you are? Documentation? Anyone who can vouch for you? Rebecca found herself stepping forward. I know it's him, Sheriff. Whatever else has changed, I'd know Lucas anywhere. Miller's expression softened slightly at her words. Be that as it may, we can't have someone claiming to be a dead man without some kind of explanation for the town records. Army sent official notification. There's legal matters to consider. I understand, Lucas said with a nod. I have some papers from the field hospital where I recovered, and there's a captain in Fort Laramie who can confirm my identity. He recognized me from before the war when I was scouting for the Army last year. The sheriff seemed to consider this. You planning to stay in town? Lucas glanced at Rebecca before answering. That depends on whether there's anything left for me here. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Rebecca felt a flush rise to her cheeks under his steady gaze. Well, the sheriff said after an awkward moment, you come by my office tomorrow with those papers. Until then, I suggest you find somewhere to stay that won't cause too much more gossip. He tipped his hat to Rebecca. "Miss Rivers." After the sheriff departed, Lucas and Rebecca were once again alone in the store, the reality of their situation settling around them like dust after a storm. "You have somewhere to stay?" Rebecca asked, practical concerns providing safer ground than the emotions swirling between them. "I was planning to take a room at the hotel," Lucas replied, "if they'll have me, given the circumstances." Rebecca nodded, trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring once the entire town knew of Lucas's miraculous return. The questions, the speculation, the inevitable gossip, it would be overwhelming. "People will talk," she said, more to herself than to him. "People always do," he replied with a shrug, "but I didn't come back for them." Their eyes met again, and Rebecca felt a tremor pass through her, a recognition of something that had survived despite everything, the connection between them, altered but unbroken. "I need time, Lucas," she said quietly, "to understand, to adjust to you being here, alive." He nodded, reaching for his hat. "Time is something I can give. I've waited 3 years to see you again. I can wait a while longer to earn back your trust." As he moved toward the door, Rebecca found herself calling after him. "Lucas." He turned, his expression open and vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. "I'm glad you're not dead," she said simply. A smile, genuine this time, transformed his face, erasing years of hardship for just a moment. "That makes 2 of us, Rebecca." Then he was gone, stepping out into the fading light of evening, leaving Rebecca alone with the impossible reality that Lucas Blackwell had returned from the grave. The news of Lucas Blackwell's return spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. By morning, it seemed everyone had an opinion on the matter. Some viewed it as a miracle, others with suspicion. Rebecca awoke after a restless night to find several of the town's more curious matrons waiting outside the store, ostensibly to purchase goods, but clearly hoping for gossip. "Is it true then?" Mrs. Holloway asked as she pretended to examine a bolt of calico. "Lucas Blackwell back from the dead." "He was never dead, Mrs. Holloway," Rebecca replied evenly as she measured coffee beans into a paper sack. "There was a mistake." "Some mistake," muttered Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife. "To think of you mourning all this time when he was off gallivanting who knows where." Rebecca fixed the woman with a cool stare. "I don't believe Lucas was gallivanting anywhere. War changes men. Sometimes they need time to find themselves again before they can come home." "And what will you do now that he's back?" Mrs. Holloway pressed, leaning forward eagerly. "I recall you were practically engaged when he left." Rebecca tied the coffee sack with more force than necessary. "What I do is my own business, Mrs. Holloway. Was there anything else you needed today?" The women exchanged glances, clearly disappointed by her reticence. They finished their shopping with minimal further probing, though Rebecca knew this was only the beginning of the town's curiosity. After they left, she sagged against the counter, exhaustion catching up with her. The emotional whiplash of the past 24 hours had left her drained. How was she supposed to proceed? Part of her heart leaped at Lucas's return, while another part remained wary, protective of the independent life she'd built in his absence. The bell above the door jingled again, and Rebecca straightened, composing her features. But instead of another nosy customer, Lucas himself stepped inside, looking more put together than the day before. He'd clearly visited the barber. His hair was neatly trimmed, the beard gone, revealing more of his face, more of the man she had known. "Morning," he said, removing his hat. "Hope I'm not intruding." "No more than everyone else today," she replied with a tired smile. "The entire town seems to have developed a sudden need for dry goods." Lucas chuckled, the sound warming something inside her. "I imagine I'm the most interesting thing to happen around here in a while." "Since Jimmy Parker's prize bull got loose and ran through the church picnic last summer," she agreed, finding herself relaxing slightly in his presence. He moved further into the store, stopping at a display of leather work gloves. "I saw the sheriff this morning, showed him my papers. He's sending a telegram to Fort Laramie to confirm my story, but he seemed satisfied for now." "That's good," Rebecca said, watching him as he examined the gloves. His hands were different, harder, with scars she didn't recognize. "What will you do now?" Lucas set the gloves down and looked at her directly. That depends partly on you, Rebecca. I came back for you, but I won't stay if my presence causes you pain. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. The old Lucas had sometimes hidden his feelings behind charm or humor. This directness was new. I don't want you to leave, she admitted softly, but I don't know how to have you here either. Not yet. He nodded, accepting her ambivalence without argument. I understand. For what it's worth, I thought about you every day I was gone. Even when I couldn't remember my own name, I remembered your face. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm at his words. Before she could respond, the door opened again, admitting Thomas Reed, the owner of the livery stable and one of Lucas's closest friends before the war. Thomas stopped dead in his tracks, his expression transforming from shock to disbelief to joy in the space of seconds. Lucas, my God, it's really you. Lucas turned, a genuine smile breaking across his face. Thomas. The two men embraced, thumping each other on the back with the unrestrained affection of old friends reunited. Rebecca watched, struck by the way Lucas seemed to shed years in Thomas's presence, becoming more like the young man who had left Redemption Creek with dreams of glory and honor. They said you were back, but I had to see for myself, Thomas said, stepping back to look at his friend. Damn, you're a sight for sore eyes. You too, old friend, Lucas replied, his voice thick with emotion. How have you been? I see you've still got all your fingers despite that ornery stallion you were breaking when I left. Thomas laughed. Tamed him eventually. He sired some of the best stock in the county since then. His expression grew more serious. But what about you? Where have you been all this time? We got word you fell at Gettysburg. It's a long story, Lucas said, glancing at Rebecca. One I owe to a lot of people, including Rebecca. Thomas seemed to suddenly remember they weren't alone. Oh, I'm sorry, Rebecca. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not interrupting, she assured him quickly. I'm sure Lucas would rather catch up with an old friend than watch me inventory canned goods. Why don't you join us for dinner tonight? Thomas suggested eagerly. Sarah would love to see you, Lucas. And we've got two little ones you haven't met yet. Lucas's eyebrows rose. You and Sarah finally got hitched, and kids already? Well, I'll be damned. He clapped his friend on the shoulder. I'd be honored to meet your family. Rebecca, you'll come too. Thomas asked, including her naturally in the invitation. She hesitated, caught between wanting to hear more of Lucas's story and the need to maintain some distance while she sorted through her feelings. Please, Lucas added quietly, I'd like you to be there. Something in his expression, a vulnerability beneath the newfound strength, decided her. Yes, thank you, Thomas. I'd be happy to come. Wonderful, Thomas beamed. 7 o'clock, Sarah will be beside herself when I tell her. After Thomas left, practically bouncing with excitement, a comfortable silence fell between Rebecca and Lucas. He seems the same, Lucas observed. Some things don't change, I guess. Some do, Rebecca replied, thinking of all the ways Redemption Creek had transformed in his absence. Thomas took over the livery when old man Jenkins died. He's on the town council now, quite respected. Lucas nodded, absorbing this information. And you said your father passed. I'm sorry for that, Rebecca. He was a good man. Thank you. She moved to straighten a display of canned peaches, needing the activity. It was pneumonia last winter. Quick at least, he didn't suffer long. And you've been running the store since then, alone. There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity and perhaps admiration. Rebecca nodded. It wasn't easy at first. Some of the suppliers didn't want to deal with a woman, but I managed to convince them my money was as good as any man's. Lucas smiled, a hint of pride in his expression. I never doubted you could handle anything that came your way, Rebecca. You always had more spine than half the men in this town put together. The compliment warmed her, especially coming from this new version of Lucas, who seemed to see her more clearly than the boy who had left had ever done. What about you? She asked, venturing into territory she'd been afraid to explore. You mentioned scouting for the army working ranch jobs. Is that what you plan to do now? Lucas considered the question seriously. I've been thinking about that. Before the war, I had dreams of having my own ranch someday. That hasn't changed, though the path to get there might look different now. Your family's land, Rebecca began, was sold to pay debts after I was reported dead, I know, he finished for her. Thomas mentioned it this morning. I don't blame my sister for that. She had to look after herself once our parents were gone. Lydia moved to Denver after she sold the property, Rebecca told him. Married a banker, I believe. I've sent her letters occasionally, but we weren't close. Lucas nodded, accepting this news with the same quiet stoicism he seemed to approach everything now. I'll write to her, let her know I'm alive, but my future is here, Rebecca, in Redemption Creek. He held her gaze. If you'll have me. The directness of his statement sent a flutter through her chest. Lucas, I'm not asking for an answer now, he said quickly. Just telling you my intentions. I came back for you, but I'll stay because this is where I belong, however that looks between us. The store bell jingled again, saving Rebecca from having to formulate a response. As she turned to help another customer, she felt both relief and frustration at the interruption. Lucas tipped his hat to her, a silent promise to continue their conversation later, and slipped out the door. Rebecca watched him go, his tall figure cutting through the busy street outside. Something was building between them, something both familiar and entirely new. Tonight at Thomas's home, away from the curious eyes of the town, perhaps they could begin to discover what that might be. The Reed household buzzed with excitement that evening. Sarah, Thomas's wife, had prepared a feast that would have impressed even the most discerning guest. The table groaned under platters of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and garden vegetables. Their children, 5-year-old Daniel and 3-year-old Emma, had been scrubbed clean and dressed in their Sunday best for the occasion, though Emma's curls already showed signs of rebellion against their careful arrangement. Rebecca arrived promptly at 7, a jar of her homemade apple preserves in hand as a hostess gift. She'd taken extra care with her appearance, wearing a deep blue dress she'd ordered from a catalog in Denver but had found few occasions to wear. Her chestnut hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, with a few curls framing her face. Sarah embraced her warmly at the door. Rebecca, don't you look lovely? Come in, come in. Lucas is already here, charming the children half to death. Indeed, as Rebecca entered the parlor, she found Lucas seated on the floor, seemingly oblivious to the damage this might do to his clean trousers, demonstrating to young Daniel how to tie a special knot used by cavalry soldiers. Emma watched with wide-eyed fascination from the safety of her father's lap. The domestic scene struck Rebecca powerfully. This was a side of Lucas she hadn't seen before, gentle and patient with children, comfortable in a family setting. The man who had returned was full of contradictions, harder in some ways with new shadows in his eyes, yet softer in others. He looked up as she entered, his expression warming. Rebecca, you look beautiful. She felt herself blush under his appreciative gaze. Thank you. I see you've made some new friends. Daniel held up the piece of rope proudly. Mr. Blackwell is teaching me army knots. He says they're secret. Lucas winked at the boy. Not secret exactly, but very special. Only the bravest soldiers know them. Daniel puffed out his chest importantly, while Emma, not to be outdone, slid from her father's lap and approached Lucas shyly. Do girls learn knots too? She asked in a small voice. Lucas considered her question with appropriate seriousness. The smartest ones do. And you look very smart to me, Miss Emma. The little girl beamed at his response, and Rebecca felt something shift inside her heart. The ease with which Lucas adapted to these children, his natural kindness, these were qualities that had always been there, but seemed more pronounced now, more intentional. Dinner's ready, Sarah announced, ushering them toward the dining room. Daniel, Emma, wash your hands, please. As they moved to the table, Thomas pulled Rebecca aside briefly. He seems well, doesn't he? Different but well. Rebecca nodded, understanding Thomas's concern for his friend. Different, yes, but still Lucas underneath it all. Thomas squeezed her arm affectionately. It's good to see you both here. Like old times, but better maybe. The dinner conversation flowed easily, with Thomas and Sarah asking Lucas about his travels, carefully avoiding direct questions about the war itself. Lucas spoke of the vast landscapes he'd seen, the mountains of Colorado, the endless plains of Kansas. the rugged beauty of the territories. He described cattle drives and frontier towns, encounters with native tribes, and the characters he'd met along the way. "I worked as a guide for a group of naturalists from back east last summer," he was saying as they enjoyed Sarah's apple pie for dessert. "They wanted to catalog plants in the mountains. Strangest bunch of men I ever met, more excited about finding a new type of moss than striking gold." Everyone laughed, and Rebecca found herself captivated by the way Lucas told his stories vividly but without self-aggrandizement, finding humor in the challenges he'd faced. "And through all that wandering, you never thought to send word home?" Sarah asked, the question gentle but direct. A hush fell over the table. Even the children seemed to sense the shift in mood, looking between the adults with curious eyes. Lucas set down his fork, his expression sobering. "I should have. That's a regret I'll carry, but after being reported dead, coming back felt complicated. The longer I stayed away, the harder it seemed to return." "What changed your mind?" Thomas asked quietly. Lucas's eyes found Rebecca's across the table. "I realized some regrets are heavier than others, and that no matter how far I traveled, I was always looking for something I'd left behind." The intensity of his gaze made Rebecca's breath catch. The honesty in his words, spoken so plainly before their friends, touched something deep within her. Sarah, perceptive as always, broke the moment by suggesting the children be put to bed. As she ushered them upstairs for their nightly ritual, Thomas invited Lucas and Rebecca to join him on the porch for some evening air. The night was clear, stars scattered across the dark Wyoming sky like diamonds on velvet. The three friends sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes creating a familiar nighttime chorus. "Have you thought about what you'll do now?" Thomas asked Lucas eventually. "Job-wise, I mean." Lucas leaned back in his chair, considering. "I've saved some money, not enough for land of my own yet, but enough to start somewhere. I've got experience with horses from my scouting days, thought I might see if anyone's hiring in that line." Thomas exchanged a quick glance with Rebecca before saying, "Funny you should mention that. My business has been growing faster than I can manage lately. Been thinking I need a partner, someone who knows horses and can help expand the breeding program." Lucas straightened, interest sparking in his eyes. "Are you offering me a job, Thomas?" "Better than that," Thomas replied. "I'm offering you a partnership. You'd have to work your way to an equal share, of course, but I'd be willing to start you at a quarter interest in the business against your labor and expertise." Rebecca watched Lucas carefully, seeing the surprise and then consideration play across his features. This was exactly the kind of opportunity he needed, a chance to rebuild his life in Redemption Creek with dignity and purpose. "That's a generous offer," Lucas said carefully. "You sure about this? You hardly know the man I am now." Thomas smiled. "I know enough. I've heard talk from traders who have passed through. The Lucas Blackwell who scouted for the army had a reputation for honesty and skill with horses. That's the partner I want." Lucas extended his hand, which Thomas clasped firmly. "Then I accept with gratitude. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Thomas replied confidently. As the men discussed initial details of their arrangement, Rebecca felt a surge of hope. Lucas would have a place here, a reason to stay beyond just his feelings for her. It would give them both the time and space to rediscover each other without pressure. When Sarah returned from settling the children, the conversation turned to lighter topics: town gossip, plans for the upcoming harvest festival, gentle teasing between old friends. Rebecca found herself relaxing fully for the first time since Lucas's return, laughter coming easily as Thomas recounted a story about the mayor's prized pig escaping during last year's county fair. As the evening drew to a close, Lucas offered to walk Rebecca home. The night had grown cooler, and he draped his coat around her shoulders as they set off down the quiet street toward her living quarters behind the general store. "That was nice," Rebecca said softly as they walked. "Seeing you with Thomas and his family, you're good with children." Lucas smiled, the moonlight catching the silver strands in his hair. "They make it easy. They see the world so clearly, no complications, just what's right in front of them." "Is that what you want someday?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its implications. A family of your own. He was quiet for a moment, their footsteps the only sound on the empty street. Before the war, I assumed I'd have a wife, children, land to pass down someday. After, it seemed like a dream that belonged to someone else. He glanced at her profile. But being here again, seeing you, meeting Thomas's little ones, it reminds me that some dreams are worth holding on to. They reached the back entrance to her store, stopping beneath the small porch lamp that cast a warm yellow glow over them. Rebecca reluctantly removed his coat, handing it back with a soft thank you. Rebecca, Lucas said, his voice low and serious. I meant what I said earlier. I came back for you, but I don't expect things to be like they were. We're different people now. I'd like the chance to know who you've become, and for you to know me as I am now, not just who I was. Rebecca studied his face, the familiar features and the new scars, both visible and invisible. I'd like that too, she admitted, to start fresh in a way. Build something new on the foundation of what we had before. Relief and hope brightened his expression. Tomorrow, then, perhaps I could come by after I meet with Thomas at the livery. We could take a walk if the store can spare you for an hour. I'd like that, she replied, finding herself smiling at the formal way he was courting her, as if they were new acquaintances rather than once betrothed lovers. Lucas hesitated, then leaned forward slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. When she didn't move, he placed a gentle kiss on her cheek, his lips warm against her skin. Good night, Rebecca Rivers, he whispered. Good night, Lucas Blackwell, she returned, her voice slightly unsteady. As she watched him walk away down the moonlit street, Rebecca touched her fingers to the spot where his lips had been. For the first time since his return, she allowed herself to fully feel the hope blossoming in her heart, not just that they might recapture what they had lost, but that they might build something even stronger from the ashes of their past. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to Rebecca's life. Lucas settled into his partnership with Thomas at the livery, quickly proving his worth with his knowledge of horses and business sense. The town's initial shock at his return gradually gave way to acceptance, especially as his story was confirmed by the telegram from Fort Laramie and by travelers passing through who recognized him from his scouting days. True to his word, Lucas courted Rebecca with patient determination. They began with walks in the evenings after she closed the store, progressing to picnic lunches by the creek on Sundays, and eventually to his escorting her to church services, making their renewed relationship public in the eyes of the town. Rebecca found herself falling in love with this new Lucas, not despite his changes but because of them. He listened more than he had before, valued her opinions on matters both personal and practical. When she mentioned difficulties with a particularly difficult supplier, he offered suggestions without assuming control. When she spoke of her dreams to expand the store's offerings, he encouraged her vision rather than dismissing it as impractical, as others had done. For his part, Lucas gradually opened up about his experiences during and after the war. One evening, as they sat on a fallen log by the creek, the setting sun painting the water gold and crimson, he finally told her the full story of Gettysburg. We were holding a position on Cemetery Ridge, he said, his eyes focused on some distant point only he could see. Confederate forces charged across an open field, so many men, Rebecca, coming straight at us like a human wave. We had orders to hold our fire until they were close enough that we couldn't miss. Rebecca remained silent, allowing him the space to share what he needed to when the order came to fire. The noise was like nothing I'd ever heard, men falling everywhere. And then they reached our lines, and it was chaos, hand-to-hand fighting. His voice had gone flat, emotionless, as if this was the only way he could tell it. I took a mini ball to the chest, another grazing my head. Next thing I knew, I was on a cart full of bodies being taken for burial. Rebecca gasped softly, the image too terrible to contemplate. I must have moved or made a sound because one of the men noticed I was still alive. They took me to a field hospital instead. Lucas's hand unconsciously touched the scar on his face. I don't remember much after that. Fever, pain. When I finally came to properly, weeks had passed. My identification had been lost. I couldn't even remember my own name at first, just fragments of memories, your face, this town, but not who I was or where I belonged exactly. How awful, Rebecca whispered, reaching for his hand, to be so lost. Lucas intertwined his fingers with hers, drawing strength from the connection. By the time my memory returned fully, I'd been transferred to a hospital in Washington. When I told them who I was, they looked at their records and said I was listed as killed in action. My personal effects had been sent home. For all intents and purposes, I no longer existed. Couldn't they have corrected the mistake? Rebecca asked. They could have, yes, but by then, he hesitated. By then, I wasn't sure I wanted them to. The man I had been, that idealistic boy who left Redemption Creek, he had died at Gettysburg. I didn't know who I was anymore, or if I had anything to offer anyone back home. Rebecca squeezed his hand. So you stayed away, trying to find yourself again. Lucas nodded, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since beginning his story. I took odd jobs, drifted, eventually signed on as a scout because I was good with horses and knew the terrain. It gave me purpose, a way to be useful without having to be close to anyone. What changed? She asked softly. Why decide to come back after so long? A small smile touched his lips. I was in Cheyenne, having a drink in some saloon, when I overheard a trader mention Redemption Creek. He was describing this stubborn woman who ran the general store there, how she drove a harder bargain than her father ever had, but was fair in her dealings. Rebecca blushed, recognizing herself in the description. Just hearing the name of this town, knowing you were here, still yourself but stronger, something shifted inside me. I realized I'd been running long enough, that whatever broken pieces were left of me, they belonged here, with you. The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. Rebecca leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss. Lucas remained still for a moment, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment, before responding with equal tenderness. When they separated, a new understanding passed between them, a bridge connecting their past to this present moment with all its possibilities. Thank you for telling me, Rebecca said softly, for trusting me with your truth. Lucas brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. There's nothing I wouldn't trust you with, Rebecca Rivers. Not anymore. As summer gave way to autumn, their relationship deepened and strengthened. Lucas proved himself not only to Thomas as a business partner but to the town as a whole. When a fire threatened the livery stable, it was Lucas who organized the bucket brigade that saved not only the horses but the surrounding buildings. When the stagecoach was delayed by an early snowstorm, Lucas led the rescue party that brought the passengers safely to town. Gradually, he reclaimed his place in the community, not as the carefree young man who had left for war, but as a reliable, respected member whose quiet strength others came to depend upon. For Rebecca, watching Lucas rebuild his life brought a satisfaction almost as deep as the growing love between them. She found herself looking forward to their time together, planning her days around the moments they would share. The store continued to prosper under her management, and with Lucas's support, she began to implement some of the expansions she had dreamed of, ordering new inventory from as far away as San Francisco. On a crisp November evening, as they walked back from a town meeting where plans for the Christmas celebration had been discussed, Lucas stopped suddenly in the middle of the street. I have something to show you, he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice that Rebecca hadn't heard before. If you're not too tired, of course not, she replied, curious at his unusual manner. What is it? It's a short ride. We can take horses from the livery. Intrigued, Rebecca agreed, and soon they were riding out of town as the last light faded from the western sky. Lucas led them along a familiar trail that followed the creek upstream, eventually turning onto a smaller path that Rebecca hadn't traveled in years. Lucas, she said with dawning recognition, this is the way to your family's old property. He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Just a bit further. They crested a small rise, and in the valley below, Rebecca could make out the outline of a cabin in the gathering darkness. Smoke curled from its chimney and warm light glowed from a window. What is this? she asked as they approached. Lucas helped her dismount before answering. The Wilkins family bought our land after my death, but they never did anything with this back section, too far from their main holdings to be useful. He took a deep breath. I bought it back, 40 acres, including this cabin that my grandfather built. Rebecca stared at him in astonishment. When? How? I've been working on it for weeks, he admitted. Used my savings for the down payment. Thomas helped me negotiate with old man Wilkins. The rest I'll pay off from my share of the livery profits. He led her to the cabin door, pushing it open to reveal a small but well-appointed interior. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Simple furniture, a table with chairs, a rocking chair by the fire, a bed in the corner with a colorful quilt made the space feel welcoming and homey. Lucas, it's wonderful, Rebecca breathed, turning in a circle to take it all in. But I don't understand, she stopped as she realized Lucas had dropped to one knee before her, a small wooden box in his hand. Rebecca Rivers, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. 3 years ago, I left Redemption Creek as a boy with promises I couldn't keep. I return as a man who understands the value of what I left behind. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small diamond that caught the firelight. This isn't the grand ring I once promised you, it's modest, like my current circumstances. But my love for you is neither modest nor simple. It's the most certain thing I know. Rebecca felt tears gathering in her eyes as he continued, I'm not asking you to pick up where we left off. I'm asking you to start something new with me here on this land, in this home I hope to build into something worthy of you. Rebecca Rivers, will you marry me? The tears spilled over as Rebecca knelt before him, taking his face between her hands. Lucas Blackwell, I fell in love with the boy who left, mourned him when I thought him dead, and have fallen in love all over again with the man who returned. She smiled through her tears. Yes, I will marry you. Not because of who you were or what you promised to be, but because of who you are right now, in this moment. Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then pulled her into an embrace that spoke of homecoming and new beginnings intertwined. Their kiss sealed the promise between them, not the innocent pledge of youth, but a deeper commitment forged through separation, grief, and reunion. Later, as they sat before the fire, Rebecca nestled against Lucas's chest as he told her his plans for the property, the improvements to the cabin, the horses he hoped to raise, the future he envisioned for them. I want to build something lasting, he said, his chin resting on the top of her head. Something that's ours, that we create together. Rebecca twisted the ring on her finger, still getting used to its weight and meaning. When I thought you were dead, I learned to stand on my own, to make decisions, run the business, be independent. Lucas tightened his arms around her. I don't want to take any of that away from you. The store is yours, I wouldn't presume to interfere. This partnership between us doesn't mean you lose yourself. She turned in his embrace to look up at him. That's why I can say yes to you now, Lucas. The boy who left might have expected me to simply be his wife, keeping his home while he built his dreams. The man who returned sees me as I am, with dreams of my own. Always, he promised, kissing her forehead. Your strength is what brought me home, Rebecca. I'd never ask you to diminish it. As they rode back to town in the moonlight, Rebecca felt a sense of completion, not as if a circle had closed, returning them to where they started, but as if a spiral had brought them to a higher place, with a clearer view of all that lay before them. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, in the small church adorned with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. Despite the winter chill outside, the sanctuary was warm with the presence of friends and neighbors who had come to witness this union that seemed miraculous to many, the return of a man thought lost, the rekindling of a love that had persevered through absence and presumed death. Rebecca wore a dress of deep ivory satin, ordered from Denver at Sarah's insistence that the occasion required something special. Lucas stood at the altar in a new black suit, his face solemn but his eyes alight with joy as she walked toward him on the arm of Thomas, who had offered to give her away in her father's absence. Dearly beloved, the minister began, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the packed church. "We are gathered here not only to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony, but to celebrate a love that has transcended even the separation of what we thought was death." As they exchanged their vows, Lucas's voice rang clear and true through the church. "I, Lucas Blackwell, take thee, Rebecca Rivers, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part." Rebecca's response came from the depths of her heart, a promise she made not only with words but with every fiber of her being. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Lucas kissed her with a tenderness that belied the strength of his emotion, the congregation erupted in applause and cheers that seemed to shake the very foundations of the small church. The celebration continued at the town hall, decorated festively for both Christmas and the wedding. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a golden glow over tables laden with food contributed by nearly every household in Redemption Creek. A small band played lively tunes, and couples young and old took to the floor to dance in honor of the newlyweds. Lucas and Rebecca moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands rarely separating as if afraid to lose contact even for a moment. "Mrs. Blackwell," Lucas murmured in her ear as they shared a quiet moment by the punch bowl. "How does it sound?" "Wonderful," she replied, leaning into his solid presence beside her, "though my customers may still call me Miss Rivers for a while out of habit." He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her side. "They can call you whatever they like as long as I get to call you my wife." The evening passed in a blur of music, laughter, and celebration. As midnight approached, signaling the arrival of Christmas Day, Lucas led Rebecca to the center of the dance floor for a final waltz. The other dancers cleared the space, forming a circle around them as the musicians began a slow, romantic melody. "I never thought I'd have this," Lucas confessed as he guided her in the steps of the dance, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. "After everything that happened, everything I saw and did, I didn't think I deserved happiness." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "Love isn't about deserving, Lucas. It's about accepting each other as we are with all our scars and strengths." He pulled her closer as they moved across the floor. "You make me want to be worthy of it anyway, of you." "You already are," she assured him, resting her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her cheek. As the dance ended, the town clock struck midnight, and a cheer went up from the crowd for Christmas, for the newlyweds, for the spirit of renewal that seemed to pervade the celebration. Lucas bent to kiss his bride once more, sealing their union before all who had gathered to share in their joy. Later that night, after the last guests had departed, and they had made their way through the quiet, snow-dusted streets to the cabin Lucas had prepared for their first home, they stood together looking out at the starlit landscape that was now theirs. "It's beautiful," Rebecca said, watching the moonlight glitter on the fresh snow. "It is," Lucas agreed, though his eyes were on her rather than the view. "We'll build a proper house come spring, closer to town so you can still manage the store easily. But I thought this cabin would do for now, for us to start our life together." Rebecca turned to him, her heart full to overflowing with love for this man who had fought his way back to her through war, loss, and his own demons. "It's perfect, Lucas. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else tonight." He drew her into his arms, his embrace a promise of all that was to come, the life they would build together, the family they hoped to create, the love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. "Welcome home, Rebecca Blackwell," he whispered against her hair. "Welcome home, Lucas," she returned, lifting her face for his kiss. "Welcome home at last." Spring came early to Redemption Creek that year, as if nature itself sought to bless the new beginning that Lucas and Rebecca had forged. The snow melted from the land they now shared, revealing rich soil ready for planting and open meadows where Lucas envisioned horses grazing. True to his word, they began construction on a larger home closer to town, one that would allow Rebecca to continue managing the store while establishing their new life together. Their first months of marriage brought adjustments and discoveries for both of them. Rebecca learned that Lucas still suffered occasional nightmares, remnants of his war experiences that would wake him in the dark hours, his body tense and sweat-soaked. On those nights, she would hold him until the trembling stopped, whispering reassurances until he returned fully to the present and to her. Lucas discovered that his independent wife sometimes needed reminding that she no longer had to carry every burden alone. When inventory arrived at the store, he would appear without being asked to help move the heavier crates. When she worked late on the account books, he would bring her dinner, gently insisting she take a break. Together, they found a rhythm that honored both their individual strengths and their shared dreams. The town watched with approval as the couple who had been separated by war and circumstance built a life that seemed to thrive precisely because of the challenges they had overcome. By the time summer arrived, their new home was nearly complete, a spacious two-story structure with wide porches and plenty of room for the family they hoped to have. The livery partnership with Thomas had proved so successful that they were expanding, adding a breeding program for quality horses that was already attracting buyers from as far away as Denver. On a warm July evening, as they sat on the porch of their nearly finished home watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rebecca turned to Lucas with news she had been saving for this quiet moment. "I visited Dr. Simmons today," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Lucas set down the coffee cup he'd been holding, giving her his full attention. "Are you unwell?" She shook her head, reaching for his hand. "Quite the opposite. Dr. Simmons confirms what I've suspected for a few weeks now." Her smile blossomed fully. "We're going to have a baby, Lucas. Come winter, there will be 3 of us." For a moment, Lucas seemed frozen, his expression one of stunned disbelief. Then joy spread across his features, transforming him in a way that made Rebecca's heart swell. He gathered her into his arms, careful despite his enthusiasm, as if she had suddenly become fragile, precious beyond measure. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our child." Rebecca laughed, happy tears gathering in her eyes at his reaction. "Yes, our child, Doctor Simmons thinks sometime in February." Lucas placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. "I never thought, after everything, to be given this gift." Words seemed to fail him, but Rebecca understood. For a man who had faced death, who had lost his identity and found it again, who had returned to rebuild a life he thought forever lost, the promise of new life, of continuation and legacy was overwhelming. "I love you, Rebecca Blackwell," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I have words to express." "I know," she replied softly, covering his hand with her own. "I've always known." The news of their expected child spread quickly through Redemption Creek, bringing a fresh wave of goodwill and excitement. Sarah Reed immediately began planning a quilting bee to create a special blanket for the baby. Thomas offered to craft a cradle from the finest wood he could obtain. Even Mrs. Holloway, the town's most notorious gossip, brought by a package of delicate baby clothes she had saved from her own children's infancy. As Rebecca's body changed with the growing life inside her, Lucas became even more attentive, sometimes to the point where she had to gently remind him that pregnancy was not an illness. He insisted on hiring additional help for the store so she could rest more, and he rearranged his work schedule at the livery to ensure he was available whenever she needed him. "You're hovering again," she told him one October afternoon as he appeared at the store for the 3rd time that day, ostensibly to deliver a package but clearly checking on her well-being. Lucas had the grace to look sheepish. "Am I that obvious?" "Completely," she replied with a laugh, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her abdomen. "I'm perfectly fine, Lucas. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." He stepped closer, his expression growing serious. "I know, but not all of them make it through." "My mother didn't with my sister." He touched her cheek gently. "I can't lose you, Rebecca, not now that I've found you again." Understanding softened her mock exasperation. You won't lose me. Dr. Simmons says I'm healthy as a horse and the baby is growing exactly as it should be. She covered his hand with hers. But I do appreciate knowing how much you care. As winter settled over Wyoming territory, bringing snow that blanketed their land in pristine white, the Blackwell home was completed and fully furnished just in time. The nursery, a small room adjacent to their bedroom, was prepared with loving care, the promised cradle from Thomas, a rocking chair by the window, and the colorful quilt created by the women of Redemption Creek hanging ready for its tiny occupant. On a frigid February night, with snow falling steadily outside and wind howling around the eaves of their sturdy home, Rebecca's labor began. Lucas sent their ranch hand galloping through the storm to fetch Dr. Simmons and Sarah Reed, who had promised to assist with the birth. The hours that followed tested both Rebecca's strength and Lucas's nerve. He remained by her side throughout, offering whatever comfort he could as she worked to bring their child into the world. When the pains seemed unbearable, she gripped his hand so tightly that he later discovered bruises on his fingers, though he never once complained. As dawn broke on a new day, the storm having passed during the night, their daughter entered the world with a robust cry that filled the room and their hearts. "She's perfect," Dr. Simmons announced, placing the swaddled infant in Rebecca's arms after the necessary cleaning and examinations. "A healthy baby girl." Lucas stared in awe at the tiny face peeking from the blanket's pink cheeks, a dusting of dark hair, and when she briefly opened her eyes, a glimpse of what might someday be the same deep blue as his own. "Hello, little one," Rebecca whispered, her voice weary but filled with joy. "We've been waiting for you." Lucas perched carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm around his wife, the other hand gently touching his daughter's small fist, which immediately closed around his finger with surprising strength. "What shall we call her?" he asked, his voice hushed in the sacred moment. Rebecca smiled up at him, love shining in her eyes despite her exhaustion. "I was thinking Hope, because that's what she represents for us, hope for the future, for all the possibilities ahead." "Hope," Lucas repeated, testing the name. "Hope Blackwell." He nodded, a smile breaking across his face. "It's perfect, just like her." Sarah, who had been quietly tidying the room, paused to look at the new family. "I'll let everyone know mother and baby are doing well. There's quite a gathering downstairs already. Word spreads fast, even in a snowstorm." After she left, Lucas and Rebecca remained in their intimate circle, marveling at the miracle they had created together. Hope squirmed slightly in her mother's arms, making small sounds that already seemed to have their own language. "I never thought I'd have this," Lucas said, echoing words he'd spoken on their wedding night. "A family of my own, a future worth fighting for." Rebecca leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "When they told me you had died, I thought my chance for this had died with you. I learned to live without it, to find purpose in other things." She looked down at their daughter. "But this is the dream I couldn't quite let go of, even when I thought it lost forever." Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple, then to the top of Hope's downy head. "Not lost," he murmured. "Just waiting for the right time." As the morning light strengthened, casting golden squares on the bedroom floor through the frost-edged windows, Lucas Blackwell held his wife and newborn daughter close, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought him here from the blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg, through years of wandering and self-discovery, back to Redemption Creek and the woman who had never truly left his heart. Outside, the town was stirring to life. Soon there would be visitors bearing gifts and good wishes, friends and neighbors eager to welcome the newest member of their community. But for now, in this quiet moment, Lucas and Rebecca savored the completion of a circle that had been broken by war and mended by love, a circle now expanded to include the small miracles sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "Welcome to the world, Hope Blackwell," Lucas whispered. "Your story begins here, but ours began long ago, was interrupted but never ended, and now continues with you." Rebecca smiled up at her husband, reaching to touch the scar on his face that marked his journey away and back again. "The best stories are the ones that find their way home," she said softly. No matter how winding the path, Lucas captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. And this one, he promised, looking from his wife to his daughter, has only just begun. In the years that followed, the Blackwell family thrived in Redemption Creek. Their horse breeding business expanded, becoming one of the most respected in the territory. Rebecca continued to manage the general store, eventually training a young woman from town to assist her, allowing more time with her growing family. Hope was joined by a brother, Thomas, named for the friend who had helped bring Lucas back into the community, and later by another sister, Eleanor, named after Rebecca's mother. Their home, once so new and empty, filled with laughter, occasional tears, and the countless small moments that create a family's history. Lucas never forgot the journey that had brought him to this point, the war that nearly claimed his life, the years of wandering, the return that had seemed both impossible and inevitable. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and he sat with Rebecca on their porch watching the stars emerge, he would speak of those days, sharing memories both painful and precious that he had once kept locked within. Rebecca, in turn, told him of her life during the years she believed him dead, the grief that had nearly broken her, the strength she had found in its aftermath, the independent woman she had become out of necessity and determination. Together, they wove these separate threads into the fabric of their shared life, stronger for the breaks that had been mended. On the 10th anniversary of Lucas's return to Redemption Creek, now a prosperous town with a railway station and twice the population it had known during the war, the Blackwells hosted a celebration at their ranch. Friends old and new gathered to share food, music, and memories beneath lanterns strung in the yard where their children played. As twilight deepened into evening, Lucas found Rebecca standing alone near the corral, watching their oldest daughter, now 8, confidently demonstrating to younger children how to offer an apple to one of the gentler horses. "She has your way with animals," Rebecca observed as Lucas wrapped his arms around her from behind. "And your stubbornness," he chuckled, the sound vibrating against her back. "And your intelligence and compassion. God help us, when she's grown, she'll be a force to reckon with." Rebecca leaned into his embrace, content in the life they had built together. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never having this? If you hadn't heard that trader mention Redemption Creek in that saloon, I would have found my way back eventually," Lucas said with quiet certainty. "Different roads, perhaps, but the same destination." He turned her in his arms to face him. "You were always my true north, Rebecca. Even when I was lost to myself, some part of me was finding its way back to you." In the distance, their children's laughter mingled with the music from the fiddle player Thomas had hired for the occasion. Friends called to them, urging them to join the dancing that had begun in the cleared space near the barn. "Shall we?" Lucas asked, extending his hand with a formal bow that made Rebecca laugh. "Always," she replied, placing her hand in his, a gesture repeated thousands of times over their years together, yet never losing its significance. As they joined the dancing, moving together with the ease of long partnership, Rebecca caught glimpses of their life spread around them, their children, their home, their friends, the community that had welcomed back a man once thought lost and celebrated the love that had endured separation and presumed death. Lucas swept her into a turn, his hand steady at her waist, and Rebecca was transported briefly to that first dance after his return, when everything between them had been uncertain and fragile with possibility. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing her expression. "That some journeys are worth every step," she answered, meeting his gaze with all the love that had grown and deepened through the years. "Even the hardest ones." Lucas's eyes, still as blue as the day he'd walked back into town and called her by name, crinkled at the corners with his smile. "Especially those," he agreed, pulling her closer as they moved beneath the stars that had witnessed their separation and reunion. Their grief and joy, their ending and beginning, all parts of a story still being written with each passing day. And in that moment, surrounded by the life they had created together, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that the young girl who had mourned a soldier lost to war could never have imagined the fullness of the happiness that awaited her, a happiness made all the more precious for having been found after being thought forever lost. Like the name they had given their firstborn daughter, what existed between Lucas and Rebecca Blackwell was indeed hope, not the untested optimism of youth, but the deep, abiding certainty that comes from losing everything and finding it again, transformed and strengthened by the very breaking that might have destroyed it forever.